Have you ever stopped to wonder, what if this morning you didn't wake up in your own life? Yeah, sounds crazy. But what if, while you were sleeping, something happened, and now, silently, you're living in a version of your reality that looks almost the same, but it's not? Look around you. Your room looks familiar, but something feels off. Maybe the color of the sky isn't exactly how you remember, or maybe you aren't quite the same either. It could be just your imagination, or maybe it's not. Thousands of people around the world report the exact same thing, that eerie, unsettling feeling that they woke up in the wrong timeline. Today, we're going to dive together into this fascinating and disturbing spiral. From reality glitches to the multiverse hypothesis, from cutting-edge science to ancient myths that warn, you don't always wake up in the same world you fell asleep in. If you want to keep exploring the greatest mysteries of our existence, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because that way, YouTube knows you want more content like this. Now, take a deep breath, because what you're about to hear might mess with your mind in a way that maybe you'll never quite recover from. Today, we're going to explore a phenomenon that until recently would have been dismissed as pure fiction, but now it seems to be spreading like an invisible virus across the internet, through forums, obscure groups, and maybe even through your own thoughts. What we call a reality glitch or timeline shift isn't just another weird theory. It's a subjective experience described by thousands of people around the world. That unsettling feeling that somehow the world you woke up in is not exactly the same as the one you fell asleep in. And we're not talking about major changes here. It's not like waking up to find that dinosaurs are alive, or that the sky suddenly turned purple overnight. No. What makes these experiences truly disturbing is the fact that the changes are small, subtle, almost imperceptible, but they leave a deep mark. The smell of the air, the tone of the light, the strange look your dog gives you, a building you swear wasn't there yesterday, or a memory that suddenly feels like it never really happened. But what if this isn't just a glitch in your memory? What if these little failures are symptoms of something much bigger, of a reality that maybe is far more unstable than we'd like to admit? In this video, we're going to investigate everything from the most rational explanations like memory science, sleep inertia, and cognitive failures, to the most speculative theories, multiverses, parallel realities, divergent timelines, and, of course, the possibility that we're living inside a simulation. So, stick around until the very end, because some of these ideas might completely change the way you see the world. So, let's start with what seems like the most obvious, the most rational, the most scientific explanation: the human brain. Why do so many people feel like they woke up in the wrong reality? Before we dive into theories about multiverses and timelines, we need to look at how our own brain works. This incredibly complex, but flawed organ. Have you ever heard of sleep inertia? Probably not by name, but you've definitely felt it. That weird sensation when you wake up groggy, disoriented, with scrambled thoughts, time feeling distorted, like your mind is trying to reboot after a system crash. And yes, that's exactly what's happening. Sleep inertia is a transitional state of low cognitive performance, where your brain is literally waking up in stages. During this moment, your sense of time, space, even your identity, is compromised. And this is where the confusion begins. When you wake up and feel like your room isn't quite the same, it might simply be your brain failing to reconstruct spatial memory. That sensation that the light seems dimmer, or that the air feels different, it could be your visual cortex, still sluggish, interpreting lighting differently, or your limbic system, responsible for emotions, trying to detect patterns and getting them wrong. But here's the problem. Even after you fully wake up, the feeling of strangeness remains, and that is much harder to explain. Why would your brain keep that sensation even after rebooting? Maybe because memories aren't like computer files, cold and intact, but rather dynamic reconstructions prone to distortions. Imagine your mind as an artist trying to paint your room from memory. Each time they try, they get small details wrong. The color of the wall, the angle of the window, the position of the chair, and each error, no matter how small, shapes your perception of reality. Now, add to that the fact that your strongest memories are emotional, not rational. You don't remember your room as it is, but as it makes you feel. And if today you woke up more anxious, or sadder, or with less energy, that emotion will color your perception of the environment, making it seem different. So, could it be that people who report waking up in the wrong timeline are simply experiencing the cumulative effects of small perceptual and emotional glitches? That would be the most comfortable explanation. But what if it's not just that? Because even considering all the complexity of the brain, there's still the issue of the coincidences. How do we explain that thousands of people worldwide report such similar experiences? Stories of waking up and noticing small changes in their environment, or revisiting places that feel different, or noticing objects that should be unchangeable, altered. This brings us to the first classic example, Amanda's story in New Jersey. Amanda lost her mother, and in an attempt to reconnect with childhood memories, decided to visit the old house where she grew up. But when she got there, the house wasn't there anymore. Instead, there was a completely different building with the same number on the same street. But it wasn't the house where she spent her childhood. The neighbors said, "This house has always been here." The photos Amanda found confirmed that. But in her memory, that was not the house. And here's the disturbing detail. Amanda's emotional certainty was absolute. She knew with every fiber of her being that the house was different. So, what happened? Was it a memory failure, unprocessed trauma, or did Amanda cross, without realizing, into a version of reality where her original home simply never existed? Pause. Take a breath. Because if that's possible, what else could have changed while we slept? Now, let's move to another example. Elsie's story in Australia. In 2020, Elsie decided to take a new route to work due to construction in Sydney. While walking through a street she rarely visited, she saw a building with a sign, Bellridge Solutions, and instantly something inside her lit up. She remembered vividly having interned there years before, but when she got home, she couldn't find any reference to that internship in her own resume. Neither friends nor former colleagues remembered. And when she went back to the building a week later, the sign had disappeared and the office was empty. Coincidence? a memory glitch, or a leak between two versions of reality? And here, we start to see a pattern. These aren't dreams. These are déjà vu. These are real memories of experiences that apparently never happened, or that did happen, but somewhere else, in another timeline. This pattern repeats in thousands of anonymous and public accounts. And perhaps the most disturbing of all is Noah's story, who traveled from Tokyo to San Francisco in 2014. Noah boarded the flight normally, but when he arrived, everything felt slightly wrong. The familiar restaurants at the airport were in different locations. The brands looked different, and even the car keys had a slightly different shape. When he got home, he found old childhood photos, but the people were different. And no, Noah wasn't sick. No neurological exam showed anything wrong. So, how do we explain this? Here, we're at a crossroads. Either we accept that, yes, the human brain is so flawed, so confused, so vulnerable, that it can create complete internal alternative realities, or we begin to consider a possibility even more unsettling. What if the glitches aren't in our brains, but in reality itself? What if, from time to time, we simply slip into a different timeline without even noticing? Which brings us to the next point. But before we go there, close your eyes for a second. Take a deep breath and ask yourself, have you ever felt that somehow you're living the right life, but in the wrong world? Up next, we'll explore the hypothesis that these experiences might be signs, that there are many versions of reality coexisting, and that maybe you've already slipped between them without even realizing it. Now, imagine if these stories weren't just isolated coincidences, but instead manifestations of a much larger phenomenon. What if there are multiple versions of reality, existing side by side, like overlapping layers, separated by barriers so thin that sometimes they break? This is the premise behind what's called the multiverse theory. According to this idea, there are infinite realities, each slightly different from the other. In one, you were born in a different city. In another, you never met your best friends. In yet another, maybe you're not even watching this video, which frankly would be a tragedy. But how could that be possible? In quantum physics, there's a concept called quantum decoherence. Basically, it suggests that subatomic particles can exist in multiple states at the same time until they are observed or measured. Now here's the mind-breaking question. What if we, by being observed, collapse our own reality? What if, with every decision, every choice, every observation, a new timeline opens and we follow one of them without even realizing it? Imagine your life as a train track, but every millisecond, the track splits into two, and you automatically follow one of the branches, while another version of you takes the other. Now, breathe and think. What if sometimes, for reasons we don't yet understand, these tracks cross again? What if, suddenly, you slip from one timeline into another, and of course, you don't notice it consciously? You don't see a portal. You don't hear a click. But when you wake up, something is different. That picture you were sure was on the wall, now it's not. The smell of coffee seems off. Your friends laugh, sounds different, and all of this seems too small to take seriously. But the accumulation of these tiny details creates an overwhelming sensation that something fundamentally has changed. And if the multiverse theory is true, then it wouldn't just be possible, it would be likely that this kind of timeline shift happens. Now, maybe you're thinking, okay, but what if it's not the multiverse? Then, let's consider an even more unsettling hypothesis, the so-called simulation theory. What if what we call reality is actually a simulation created by a superior entity, or perhaps by an ultra-advanced civilization? Sounds like science fiction? Absolutely. But it's a possibility taken seriously by thinkers like Nick Bostrom, Elon Musk, and many renowned physicists. According to this theory, the universe is a kind of game running on a mega computational structure so advanced that the conscious beings inside it, meaning us, aren't capable of perceiving it. And here's where the explanation for reality glitches comes in. What happens when you play a video game and the map doesn't load correctly? Textures fail, objects disappear, elements move strangely. And what if what we're calling reality glitches are actually rendering failures? Think about it. You wake up and feel like the world is strange. Maybe because while you slept, the system needed to run an update, perform maintenance, or even a partial reset. And when you open your eyes, everything is almost the same, but with small differences that your brain picks up, even if you can't explain why. This idea might sound absurd, but if you look at how technology is evolving, you'll see that we're already creating highly realistic simulations with characters that often don't know they're just code. Games, artificial intelligences, metaverses, all of this is just beginning. Now, imagine what a civilization millions of years ahead of us could create. Maybe we are that experiment. And when the system fails or needs adjustment, we experience it as a glitch. Now, pause. Take another breath, because there's yet another possibility. What if the glitches aren't accidental? What if they're deliberate? Some theorists speculate that these changes in reality are intentional adjustments, like a kind of maintenance, or even a social experiment. Imagine that every error you notice isn't a mistake, but a message, a signal left for those perceptive enough to realize that not everything is as it seems. This idea connects to ancient spiritual traditions, philosophies, and religions that have always suggested that reality is an illusion, a veil hiding the true essence of the universe, and that only those who are awake can perceive it. Now, looking from this angle, maybe people who feel they woke up in the wrong timeline aren't crazy or deluded, but awake. Maybe they've noticed, even if just for a moment, the cracks in the structure of reality. And honestly, if you've made it this far, listening to this reflection, maybe you're starting to see too. But before you jump to conclusions, in the next part, we'll analyze cultural, historical, and philosophical evidence, showing that this sensation of a broken reality isn't a modern phenomenon, but something humanity has experienced for millennia. And maybe you'll discover that this feeling of being in the wrong world is more common and older than you ever imagined. If you think that this idea of waking up in the wrong timeline is something born from the internet, from obscure forums or wild theories, it's only because you haven't looked at history. In truth, this feeling that the world is not quite right has accompanied humanity since forever. Let's start with Celtic folklore. Among the ancient tribes of Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, there are countless stories of people who, unknowingly, crossed into what they called the fairy mounds, magical, mysterious places where time didn't follow the same rules, and where those he entered rarely returned the same. Some disappeared for hours, others for decades, and when they came back, they felt that the world had changed, or, even more disturbing, that they had changed, while the world had remained the same. See the similarity? This idea of accidentally crossing a rift between worlds, of moving into a reality that seems familiar but carries an indescribable strangeness, is the essence of what we now call timeline shifts. Now, let's cross to the other side of Europe. In Norse mythology, there are accounts of the dream walkers, shamans who during sleep or altered states of consciousness would travel between the 9 worlds that made up the Viking cosmology. They would wake up bringing knowledge they couldn't explain, visions of places they had never visited, and often with the sensation that they had brought something back with them, something that should not have crossed over. And are you starting to see that maybe what we now call reality glitches is just the modern version of a fear that has haunted humans for a very, very long time? What if this phenomenon has always existed, but in each era, it was given a different name? In feudal Japan, for instance, there are tales of the mirrored worlds, parallel realms separated from ours by an almost invisible layer, where time passes strangely, where colors are slightly different, where people are not exactly the same. Ancient stories tell of travelers getting lost in these worlds, and when they returned, they were never the same. Now, here's something interesting. In many cultures, these crossing points are called thin places, locations where the veil between realities is thinner, more fragile. Dense forests, isolated clearings, ancient churches, mist-covered mountains. In all these places, there are reports of people who vanished or who returned, profoundly changed. So the question is, could what we now call reality glitches be the same phenomenon that humanity has been whispering about for centuries, but that we, modern and rational, prefer to ignore? Maybe the difference isn't in the phenomenon, but in how we choose to interpret it. Today, we use words like multiverse, simulation, rendering glitch, but deep down, we're talking about the same thing. That visceral fear of waking up and realizing that the world is no longer the same. Now, let's leap to contemporary philosophy. The French philosopher Jean Baudrillard, for example, spoke of hyperreality, the idea that in modern society, we no longer live in contact with raw reality, but rather within a simulation of it. For him, most of our experience of the world is already mediated by symbols, images, narratives, not by reality itself. If we already live in hyperreality, what's the difference between that and a full simulation? Could it be that this feeling of the world is wrong is in fact our instinctive perception that, yes, our reality is already an artificial construct, And more, could the sensation of having shifted timelines not be a system error, but an integral part of how that system keeps running? Now, pause, because there's yet another angle, perhaps the most human of all. What if these reality glitches are in fact symptoms of a deeper malaise, an emotional manifestation of how we feel displaced in a world that changes faster than we can keep up? Think about it. Never in human history have changes happened at the speed they do today. New technologies emerge every week, habits transform, traditions disappear, and often we feel like we've lost control over the direction of our own lives. Could it be that when we feel we've woken up in the wrong timeline, we're really just giving voice to our fear that, yes, maybe our life is no longer ours. Maybe we're not living in another timeline, but in a version of the world so accelerated, so chaotic, so disconnected, that the only explanation our mind can find is that somehow everything changed while we were sleeping. Now, breathe once more, because whatever the explanation, one thing no one can deny: this phenomenon is real. Not necessarily in the physical sense, but in the human, existential sense. It is real because it is felt, because it changes how we see the world, how we relate, how we trust or stop trusting our own memory. And maybe that's the real lesson behind all these stories, ancient and modern. That reality is much more fragile than we like to believe. And that, in the end, what we call reality is not a rigid, immutable structure, but rather a continuous process of interpretation, of construction, and reconstruction. Now, I leave you with one last question. If tomorrow you wake up and realize that something is different, will you ignore it, or will you start to wonder, in which timeline are you really? Up next, we'll talk about how to recognize these signs and what to do if one day you suspect that you didn't wake up in the same world you fell asleep in. Now, imagine this. What if the next time you wake up, it's not just the light, or the smell, or the arrangement of your furniture that's different? What if something bigger changes? Maybe the entire world, or who knows, maybe you. That possibility might seem unsettling or liberating, depending on how you choose to see it. What I can guarantee is that the most important questions are the ones without easy answers. And if you want to keep exploring, reflecting, and questioning the nature of reality, then stay right here, because the next video is about to appear on your screen, and it might just be the beginning of yet another deep journey. Thank you for watching,